Greetings and welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here to join me as we pay tribute to the great Jack Dejohnette, pianist, composer, accompanist, who passed yesterday around 5 p.m. near his home in Woodstock, New York. I had been up there a couple of weeks ago to do an interview for Stereophile magazine because the one I did late last year, my computer ate it, and it was all set up to go, and I went and I got there and Jack didn't look good. And we did about a half hour's worth of interview, and he asked if we could stop. So, for those of you who don't know who Jack Dejohnette is or was, definitely one of the most influential jazz musicians of the 20th century, hands down. Jack comes after the lineage, Jack is part of the lineage of Elvin, Philly Joe, Tony Williams, Jack. And Roy Haynes. He brought a little bit of Roy Haynes, a little bit of Tony, a little bit of Elvin, but mostly he brought a lot of Jack Dejohnette. He had this style that was like listening to a thunderstorm or listening to the leaves fall, whichever contrasting deliberate intention you'd care to go to. He could create an incredible amount of energy and power and thrust and forward motion, but he could also play very beautifully on his cymbals. He's part of the ECM cymbal sound. He founded it, really. It became so popular. And he's also part of the ECM drum sound as well as the CTI drum sound. In the 70s, he was the house drummer for both of those very different labels, playing funk, open-ended funk on one end, the CTI, and playing these amazingly colorful tapestries of sound with all sorts of punctuations and weird phrasing, and just, you knew Jack right away when you heard him. It was instantaneous. No one else sounded like Jack Dejohnette. And I bought many records, as you see here, just as he was on them. And he recorded for many labels. Of course, he had 12 albums as a leader on ECM. He had records as a leader on MCA. But his first few records were on Prestige, Trio, and Milestone. He was such a gargantuan presence, even though I interviewed him three times, and he was sort of quiet. And one time, I've told the story before, he had a recording studio downstairs, rehearsal studio, when I did him for Modern Drummer in the 90s. And he said, "You're a drummer, sit down and play." I'm like, So I sat down and tried to swing, and he said, "Yeah, you're swinging." He pulled up his upright bass and started playing with me. I couldn't keep going. That was just too brain shattering. I wasn't relaxed in his presence. As it's, you can't try to be relaxed in any of these great masters' presence, and he was a great, great master. Trained as a pianist in Chicago. If you look at the gatefold opening of Album, one of his records on ECM, I think it's ECM, there's a photo of him with a band, all these young dudes, and he's playing piano. And I think he applied that pianistic, layered, expansive approach to the drum set. He was probably hearing melodies, but he had incredible technique in his hands. I mean, he could just play anything he thought. And it was just, I think of his drumming as just this beautiful wash that was also incredibly rhythmic and punchy. And he played many, 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 many recording sessions. As I said, if I see a new record, and I still see new records with him all the time. Geez, I don't have that. There's still new records coming out that he was a sideman on. So let's just talk about a few of his early records. His first record is the Dejohnette Complex on Milestone. This album has one track with Roy Haynes called Papa Daddy and Me, where Jack's playing a recorder and Roy is swinging. This is a beautiful record. I'm sure it'll be released pretty soon. Who else is on the record? Eddie Gomez, Benny Maupin, Miroslav Vitous, Stanley Cowell, Roy Haynes. Beautiful record. Young, baby-faced Jack Dejohnette. This record, Sorcery, sort of picks up on the zeitgeist of the era, which is early 70s, I believe. This was reissued. When I went to visit Jack in late last year, I found the reissue of this and gave it to him. He was totally unaware of it. This album is very 70s. It's very kind of psychedelic in places. Parts of it are written as a suite. Very expansive, very driving, very explosive. Another one in the same zone, but a little more in the pocket. Have You Heard? Benny Maupin, Gary Peacock, Hideo Ichikawa. And right away, Jack's composing. 3 of these tunes on this record are his. He was a really strong composer, a really strong player. Here's another one, same era, Cosmic Chicken. I think this is on Prestige. Cool. Abercrombie, Alex Falter, Peter Warren, 1975. This next one is pretty bizarre, actually. Compost. I think Adam Nussbaum's in this group. This is a Jack Dejohnette vocal record. Bob Moses, rather, Harold Vick, Jack Gregg, Jack Dejohnette. And this is kind of like we're going to jump in on this 70s psychedelic thing and make some cash. Now, I'm sure they were all very serious about what they were doing because the thing still grooves like a mofo. But cool photo of a Mayan temple there. But it's a bit of a one-off. Jack keyboard. This is one of his records on Trio. I have the other one as well. I think it's called Time and Space. On this one, Jack's playing keyboard, and he has two Japanese musicians playing bass and drums. And it's, even at this point, which is an early 70s or mid-70s record, he knows who he is. He's composing on piano. He's very deliberate. He's in Japan. He really arrived fully formed. I was very honored to write 7 essential tracks that you should hear by Jack for the New York Times, which will appear, I guess, today or tomorrow. Hank Steamer wrote the obit. And I wrote that as soon as he heard Jack, on the first record, really, on the Dejohnette Complex, he is fully formed. This is Jack Dejohnette. There's no getting up to speed. There's no changing of styles. Boom, he's right there. This volcanic, combustible, fiery, so expansive. I believed he called his drumming multi-directional, and it was like each one of his limbs could go in separate directions. They're all swinging hard. Everybody's on the search, as they should be, for the Joe Henderson records on Milestone with Jack. It's just quintessential Jack, quintessential 70s Joe, multiple. Empire of the People, which recently came out. I have the other ones too, Relaxing Camarillo and Black is the Color, but those are not Jack. I think those are Peter Erskine. But these are great must-have records. I complained a couple of years ago in a stereophile column, when are they going to start reissuing the Joe Henderson records? They've done one. Jumping ahead to the 80s and 90s, Jack was part of the new MCA Impulse label, still calling his band Special Edition, as he did on ECM. These are great records with killer lineups. Very hard records to find. Special guest Nana Vasconcelos. This is when he's playing his beautiful white Sonar drums. I think these are great records. Produced by Jack Dejohnette, Ricky Schultz. Audio Visual Scapes, fantastic record. Killer lineup. Greg Osby, Met Goodrick, Gary Thomas, Lonnie Plaxico. 1988. These are expansive, beautifully recorded, beautifully performed records that just smoke. And I believe, of course, they're all Jack's tunes. Jack even though he's a piano player, he only did 2 piano records. One of them being the Jack Dejohnette piano album on Landmark from 1985. And he did a record called Return for Nouvelle Records, which is a subscription-only label that records very high-end audiophile stuff. Jack was an audiophile. When I was up there, he had a pair of cool 70s era Ohm speakers, I believe. A very nice turntable. I can't remember the brand, but an audiophile system for the mid 1970s. He wasn't fooling around. I believe this is a one-off single. Jack Dejohnette and Lester Bowie, also on MCA Impulse. Anyway, the MCA Impulse records are great. Let's get into his ECM records, which I think I have most. I don't have all, though. I was listening to album. That's Jack's backyard with his wife Lydia and his 2 daughters. That's behind his house. He lived in Woodstock, down a road. His backyard overlooked a huge ravine. And one time I was there and I was with him talking. I said, "Man, do you ever see UFOs out here?" And he said, "Yeah, all the time." He said, Sun Ra came from a UFO. And one of the things I asked him in the interview we did 2 weeks ago, I said, "Where did this incredible force come from that you have in your playing, this ability to sum a tornado at will?" And he said, "It's in nature. It's all around us." He was a cerebral being, man, a cosmic thinker, a very progressive mind. I mean, he was a genius. You know, it's a really incredible loss, and I've been really sad for a couple days. I drank too much last night. Anyway, album is a really great one. My friend Matt Merowitz says this is his favorite. This is very expansive, very acoustic, maybe a little more laid back, but very searing in places. And these are all from the 70s, I guess, up through the 80s. Jack Dejohnette, New Directions, Eddie Gomez, John Abercrombie. All these records are prime examples of beautiful compositions, incredible improvisation, and they embody the spirit of their time so well. This is one of my favorites, Jack Dejohnette Special Edition, ECM. ECM has reissued none of these records. They came out once, and that was it. Jack Dejohnette, David Murray, Arthur Blythe, Peter Warren, One for Eric, Zoot Suit, Central Park West, India, Journey to the Twin Planet. This is a motherfucker of a record. This is a beast of a record. Also fun, Special Edition, Inflation Blues. Another one of my favorites, New Directions, In Europe. This is such an expansive record. Gomez, Abercrombie, Bowie. These are all great records, and you can really find them pretty cheap. Jack Dejohnette's Untitled. Same lineup, Alex Foster, Peter Warren, John Abercrombie, Jack. Tin Can Alley, $5. These are masterworks by master musicians. When I lived in North Carolina, I left North Carolina in 1990. I was aware of Jack Dejohnette as a drummer, but I hadn't really dug in deep. But when I arrived, I started working at Tower Records, and I had a girlfriend who was an opera singer, and she loved Keith Jarrett. So I bought Still Live. This is the first time I really, really got into Jack. This is the standard trio with Gary Peacock. Beautiful playing. I mean, just marvelous, marvelous work. We went to see him at Carnegie Hall. It was just unbelievable. Still Live, not reissued. There's another one. This is actually the first. Is this the first record? I think this is the first record with the trio when it's not called the Trio Changes. That might have been just called Standards. Of course, he had a long run of records as a sideman for CTI, Freddie Hubbard, where he brought that incredibly chunky, in the pocket, funky, but always the hint of simmering below the surface fire. His groove was so expansive. He could really open things up. I can't find my favorite one on CTI, which is Joe Farrell Moon Germs, but this is another one. Joe Farrell Quartet. Joe Farrell Song of the Wind with Jack and McLaughlin. He's on a couple George Benson records, Body Talk, Beyond the Blue Horizon. The CTI stuff is it's essential. It's great. That music is still very much of its period. It sounds like 70s music. I think mostly because the way it was recorded. It was the dawn of the mic pickup on the bass, which sounds really horrible, which gave Eddie Gomez that sound. But great records. As I said, Jack was the house drummer for both ECM along with John Christensen, and to some degree Edgar Vasella. But really it's Jack and John Christensen who sounded totally different. They were both kind of multi-limbed in a way. But, that was the beginning of Jack's drums being recorded in far left and right stereo with crazy panning. I'm going to show you one record here where the drums are it's like 3 tornadoes in front of you. Anyway, he did such amazing work. So for so many artists on ECM. Again, these records are all worth picking up if you see them. Gary Peacock, Keith, Jack, Tales of Another. I love ECM records. I feel like they're kind of lost people who don't know what they are. They're ethereal, they're beautiful, they're manic, they're explosive, they're calm. They cover such a wide variety of musicians and subgenres of music. Amazing Zakir Hussain records. So much incredible stuff. Gateway Trio. Serious, heavy, blow-down improvisation. Colin Walcott, who played What did he play? Tambura? I can't remember. Jack, wall clock, cloud dance. That's what Jack was. He was a cloud dancer, man. That music, his drumming just it was inspiring. It just would lift you up. It'd take you out of your seat and throw you into the clouds, throw you into the universe, and then drive you around at rapid light speed, then deposit you gently back on the earth. The original Gateway record, astounding record with Dave Holland. There are many records with Dave and Jack. Amazing Hookup, Pat Metheny, Ornette Coleman, Song X. I asked Jack what was his favorite ECM record, and he said 8081, which I've been listening to all day today. That is really a wide open Jack Dejohnette record. He's just playing it full bore, having a lot of fun. This is a really strange record I found in Germany. Werner Perchner, Harry Peppel, and Jack Dejohnette piano trio. Went to Germany. I met a writer, and he said, you should go to this record store. And they had all these German ECMs, which if you're into ECMs, you know Germany, those sound so much better. George Adams, Sound Suggestions. He's on another George Adams record. A record that only came out on CD, John Scofield's Saudades from 2003 or 2007. Absolute burning Jack on all fours. Another burning record with John Surnam. The Amazing Adventures of Simon. Of course, everyone loves Jack on the Kenny Wheeler records, Dear Juan, the trumpet player, and New High. Another more recent one from the thousands, where Jack is just playing beautifully, from 2017 with Django Bates and Nur Brahim, Blue Maquans. This is really beautiful, great recording quality. You know, we're lucky to have Jack so beautifully well recorded. You can't hear him as well on the CTI records because CTI was so much into overdubbing, so sometimes the drums are recessed. But on so many of the ECM records, he just sounds, the recording is just beautiful. It's another one with pianist Richie Byrack, Elm. One of the first ones I ever heard with Mick Goodrick. Good friend of mine was a guitarist in the 80s. We played in a wedding band together. We'd go over to his place and drink lots of coffee and smoke cigarettes or cigars, and he turned me on all these amazing records. That was one of them. Another innovative guitarist, Bill Connors of Mist and Melting with Jack. This is from the early 70s, 72, 77. And, you know, he kept working as a sideman right up through the 2000s. Here's one with Nels Landauke and Nels Henning Orsted Pedersen. I think this is 2015 on Storyville. Beautiful trio record, beautifully recorded. The Target. This is one of my favorites for many, many reasons. Michael Brecker's debut record on Impulse with Charlie Hayden, Pat Metheny, Kenny Kirkland. And the opening track, my favorite track, is called Nothing Personal. And it's recorded by and mixed by James Farber, who I recently interviewed for Stereophile. This is such a giant, atmospheric, acetylene, incendiary, beautiful recording. And my New York Times thing, I wrote that on Nothing Personal, he evokes the sound of a cat destroying our living room. He is everywhere, all at once. Just phenomenal. Michael Brecker's killing on as well. Here's another strange one I found recently on Lime Tree with Cedar Walton. You know, I work at Jazz Record Center, so we see these records. This is one of the most amazing of all the Jack records, as far as I'm concerned, with his Dave Holland hookup, triplicate, Dave Holland trio with Steve Coleman. On this record, I forgot which track, but the drum is recorded in hard left and right stereo with the big center fill. And when he rolls, the entire kit just goes right in front of you, back and forth, and it's just astounding. It's like watching the Indy 500. I mean, the drums are fat and full, and he's bashing. You know, he pioneered this Sonar sound, a Peisty cymbal sound, even though I think he went with Sabian near the end. That's what part of his identity was, the drums and the way he made them play. When that anecdote I told you about playing his drum set, the cymbal was like a manhole cover. Duh, duh, duh. I think he was really strong. If you see videos, he had really supple, beautiful hands. Somebody like Kenny Clark, who just had beautiful hands. Buddy Rich, incredible technique, flowing, beautiful. Jack had all of that. And this is one of my favorites. Hard to find, triplicate, killer record. Most recently, Forces of Nature with McCoy Tyner and Joe Henderson. Jack is kind of buried. It's not a great recording, but they are burning on all fours. Another must-have record. A duo record with Jack, Keith Jarrett, Ruta, and Danya. I believe this is the record where Keith ended up suing Steely Dan for a tune they sort of lifted. Anyway, the point of this video is that you check out these records. These are amazing records. He was an amazing musician, a shapeshifter, a holy being, a master from another world who was with us a brief amount of time. Just like Elvin, just like Tony, these guys are just inhabited from above with some great, great gift that we can, enjoy. And, it's healing. This music is so healing and powerful. And it's, who said Ellington or somebody, great jazz takes away the dirt of everyday life. And that's what it does. Thanks for watching. I urge you to go on Spotify and make a Jack Dejohnette playlist, but get into his music. You'll be all the better for it.